George Kambosos Jr. found himself in a tough battle, bleeding and struggling to catch his breath after barely scraping past Jake Willie, a last-minute replacement who wasn't even supposed to be in the ring. Just days before the fight, Willie was a spectator with a ticket in hand, likely expecting to enjoy the event from the stands rather than stepping into the spotlight himself. But in a shocking twist, he found himself inside the ropes, nearly pulling off an upset that no one saw coming. Kambosos, despite his visible exhaustion and the clear difficulties he faced, grabbed the microphone and confidently called out Richardson Hitchins. "Hitchins, let's go!" It was a bold statement considering what had just transpired inside the ring, and to many observers, it felt like Kambosos was trying to deflect from the reality of his struggle by shifting the attention toward a new challenge. Somewhere in Brooklyn, Hitchins was probably laughing at the call-out. Kambosos had just gone through an absolute war against a fighter who hadn't even been in training camp, yet he was acting as if he had just dominated some of the biggest names in the division. The truth, however, was completely different. There was no masterclass performance from Kambosos, no dominant display of skill or control. Instead, he had barely scraped by, forced to dig deep against an opponent who had received the call to fight on a whim. This wasn't a high-level contest between two world-class fighters. It was a desperate struggle for survival. Kambosos spent much of the fight backpedaling, absorbing clean shots, and looking increasingly vulnerable as the rounds went on. Meanwhile, Willie, who had no real preparation, stood his ground, proving that sometimes pure determination and grit can take you further than expected. Jake Willie, who had absolutely no time to prepare for this fight, went from being a spectator to nearly stealing the show. Despite being thrown into the deep end on incredibly short notice, he pushed Kambosos to his absolute limits and exposed just how much the former champion had declined since his shocking win over Teofimo Lopez in 2021. Back then, Kambosos was the underdog who stunned the world with his relentless pressure and sharp counterpunching. But this version of Kambosos looked tired, slower, and far less effective. He struggled to impose himself on Willie and at times seemed overwhelmed by the pressure of a fighter who, in reality, shouldn't have been anywhere near his level. After the fight, Kambosos appeared drained, barely able to explain what had just happened, let alone make a convincing argument for why he should be considered a top contender in the division. Yet, instead of acknowledging his struggles, he took the opportunity to downplay Willie's effort by claiming that Hitchins wouldn't fight as hard as Willie did, as if to imply that he would handle the Brooklyn boxer with ease. In reality, if Kambosos were to step into the ring with Hitchins, the outcome would likely be a one-sided beatdown. Hitchins is one of the slickest and most skilled boxers in the 140-pound division, known for his sharp jab, defensive mastery, and ability to completely neutralize opponents. If Kambosos struggled this much against a last-minute replacement with little to no training, what chance would he have against a fighter who has spent years perfecting his craft? Hitchins could likely land hundreds of jabs at will while making Kambosos swing at nothing but air, forcing him into exhaustion before completely outclassing him. This isn't 2021 anymore, and Kambosos isn't the fighter who once shocked Lopez. Right now, he's the guy who barely survived 9 rounds against an opponent who wasn't even in proper fight shape. As of now, Hitchins has yet to officially respond to Kambosos' challenge. But honestly, he doesn't need to. The fight footage speaks louder than words. Hitchins has already proven himself against legitimate contenders, while Kambosos just struggled against a fighter who hadn't sparred in months. If Hitchins ever decides to reply, it wouldn't be surprising if he simply posts clips of Kambosos' performance as his response. For now, though, the contrast between the two fighters couldn't be clearer. One is rising through the ranks with dominant performances, while the other is desperately clinging to relevance after a fight that left more questions than answers. For Kambosos, the reality of his situation is hard to ignore. Just a few years ago, he was at the peak of his career, shocking the world by defeating Teofimo Lopez in an electrifying performance. That night, He looked like a warrior, relentless, sharp, and ready to take over the lightweight division. But fast forward to today, and that version of Kambosos seems like a distant memory. His fights since then have been a struggle, with losses to Devin Haney and a questionable win against Maxie Hughes.